Troy University's Quality Enhancement Plan is creating a culture of reading with the goal of improving student learning through intensively improving reading skills. The 5-year plan includes the Common Reading Initiative, the College Reading Initiative, and the Faculty Development Initiative. In the following roundtable discussion, Troy faculty members discuss techniques and practices they use to create a culture of reading.
Hello and welcome to a roundtable discussion of Troy University's Quality Enhancement Plan. I'm Hal Fulmer and I'll serve as the moderator for today's roundtable. Troy University's Quality Enhancement Plan is a multi-year series of activities focusing on enhancing student learning by creating a culture of engaged reading at Troy University. Today's roundtable participants will discuss a variety of topics and issues related to the general area of reading at the university, and we'll also offer some good ideas on how you can assist your students as they seek to become more engaged readers. I want to introduce today's participants as we move into our conversation. We have Joe McCall from History, Teresa Rogers, who is the director of our Student Development Unit in our Center for Student Success, Karina Valkyrie from Psychology, John Jenwright from Music, and Ben Robertson from English. And I appreciate you all joining us here today. I think I'll open with just a question for all of us to sort of move around the table with. We say at Troy University as a part of our QEP that we read. So I want to reframe that a little bit, and the question I have is, why read? Why is that important to us? And I'm going to offer the English professor, which is where we often think reading occurs. He gets the first turn on that, Ben. Why read? What does that mean?
Well, first of all, I mean, just to communicate, right? I mean, that's sort of the point of reading in general, or even speaking, right? And the thing is, particularly in my field, of course, in my field we have two basic kinds of courses. We have composition, which is about writing, but to write better, what do you have to do better? You have to read better, right? So the better you read, the better you'll write. And then of course we have literature courses where if you don't read, you're in big trouble there. So I mean, the thing is, the key is trying to find the right style of reading for each particular person, I think. So.
Okay, Joe, what's the relationship between reading and history? That's another one of those.
Oh, I like this question.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll address that just for a second. One of my favorite films is Shadowlands, about C.S. Lewis, and there's a line in that where he says, we read, and I'm paraphrasing it, we read so we won't feel alone. And that's one of the reasons why I encourage my students to read is, number one, so they won't be alone with their own thoughts. The first day of class, I always say to my students, I'll never tell you the truth, and don't look for the truth. What I'll offer you is what I know, but the more I read, the broader that spectrum becomes, and then maybe I move a little bit closer to truth. So one of the reasons I read is so I don't feel alone, because it brings me in connection with people and ideas. But also I read so that I get other people's ideas that'll crowd out some of my ideas that maybe aren't accurate. And so I think it's important to let our students know right off the bat, we're here to challenge your constructs and expand them, and then you choose the ones that you embrace. Well, and with history, I think that's especially important.
Okay, well, let's build on that for everybody then. And so the question is, we're reading because it expands our sense of understanding. What's the difference in reading and what we're talking about, which is engaged reading? Because we know people read. They read text and websites, and they used to read email, which is now left to us as the archaic form of communication, right? I mean, it's not that we don't engage in an act of reading, but what about the sense of engaged reading? What do you think, Karina? What makes engaged reading important? How would you define that? If a student said, what's this engaged reading? What would your thought be?
Well, I think for me, because in psychology, there's a couple of types of reading that we do. There's that, we're very clinical, the theories. And so there's technical material, and to really read technical material, they have to be engaged in the process. They have to be, my awareness in the last 11, 12 years is they are not coming to me knowing how to deconstruct or prepare to read technical material. It's overwhelming, it's scary, so of course then they're going to avoid it. So, and I teach two of the larger reading technical materials with the orientation to psychology and the research methods. So engaged reading for technical material is they have to understand the value of it and the process. Then there's that engaged reading of, and a lot of them will read I Am Still Alice, or the stories of multiple personality, those case studies. That engages them also, but it's oftentimes those books are not as accurate from a clinical standpoint.
Right.
So I want them to be reading that, but then I want to, for me, engagement is tying it back to what's been empirically supported in a theoretical foundation. So I think psychology students can read for the fun of case, you know, the family crucible. I require that for anyone who wants to work with families. It's a well-written by Napier and Whitaker, and they're the grandfathers of some of the family therapy systems. But now it's like, well, now we have to engage it, we have to be able to deconstruct it. And that's the thing that I have to teach. I teach it's like we are talking the whole semester. How do we take this, parse it out, deconstruct it, and that's engagement for us.
Yeah.
If I may, this is a little bit different from your field, of course, but in English, one of the things that I try to tell my students to do is to try to connect the material they're reading somehow with themselves,
Right.
if they possibly can, or even if not with themselves, with something that they've heard from somewhere else. Because it's one thing to look at a page and just say the words. I mean, if you look at a page and you just say the words in your mind, you're reading of in a sort of a way, but you're not really engaged with it. And to be engaged with it is to make those connections.
Well, I talked with a couple of students recently, and in their high school experience, they were 5 or 6 of them said to me that their teachers would put on a book on tape, and they said follow along in on the book.
Right.
And they found that to be horrifically boring, and they said, do you think we really followed along in the book? I was talking to my friend because I could hear it. And it's like, that is just reading words.
That's just hearing the words, right?
And our students can put words together, but finding that meaning, finding that context, and finding that purpose. And I say, make it your story. A lot of interaction is helpful for me. It's like this summer in general psych, we were talking about the learning theories. So I had them get up, and I don't prepare them for this because if I did, then it wouldn't be as much fun. I had the 3 kind of leaders teach the students how to do a dance step. And boy, and they got their music out, they got their phones out, and it's like, and one leader just assumed everyone would have rhythm and know it.
Right.
The other one said, do this, do this. And so they were like, looked like little robots or zombies, you know, stepping back and forth. And the other one went out, found a video on the step, got the music, and then pulled his team and taught them 3 steps. And then we had this dance-off. And I said, now tell me and put it with the theories. What did you just do? What did we know about information processing? What did you, and it's like, well, they hadn't read all their chapter.
Yeah.
So what I'm finding is, and they say, if you will kind of quiz us with it, and if you send the message that this reading can be applicable. So that, I think, is my biggest challenge in this upcoming year, is to do more of that. But it was fun. They got it, and then when we went down into positive parenting discussion, that we could go back to our learning lesson in the dance.
And they could see that.
And they could see it.
Let me ask this question, because I want to get John and Teresa in with us as well. I think we bring to any encounter with our students our own past, who we are, what's a product of who we are. I know we're readers. We come out of the generation of readers. I grew up in a home with books. I grew up with a mother and dad who read to me. I went to the library when I was 6 years old and got a library card. A major moment in my life, which is not connected at all to our students. I mean, when I tell that story, I am the anthropologist on Mars that Oliver Sacks talks about. So what is it out of your experience, Teresa, that shaped you as a reader, and how do you translate that? Because that's really what Corinna's talking about. How do we translate that now to a current audience?
Well, when I was young, I remember having to look things up in the dictionary, and I remember all the Britannica dictionaries in my home and how I could find any information that I wanted there. And it's hard to imagine now that students don't have that experience. They don't open books, they don't read stories. Their parents may or may not have read stories to them. They may have played video games. So I know with orientation, which is the course that I'm involved with, a lot of times with the common reader, we have to look at ways that connect them and hook them, so they'll be interested in taking a look at what the common reading book is. And it's amazing because the formats of a lot of the books that we've used have been very, very different, but every book has been an opportunity to bring up something that is familiar to the students, that has something to do with them or with someone they know. And it is that interest that sparks, you know, their reading and their comprehending. I would like to say that they all read and they love it and they're happy at the end of the day. Most of them read, most of them actually get the point by the end of the course. Most of them grumble at the beginning of the course, but for most of them, you know, once they've read the book and you make those connections, for instance, the ghost map, we had a speaker come in and talk to us about digging wells in Africa for clean drinking water because 6,000 children are dying a day. You know, when you talk to students about that and then you ask them what their efforts are to help, you know, contribute to society for these different areas, a lot of times they become involved, and that's a hook to get them, you know, doing community service. So.
Sure. Well, what about you, John? Do you remember the first book you read? Do you remember coming out? What books were like for you as a child?
Sure. The first books were those Bible story books.
Yeah.
The parents would read to me, and I started music at a very early age, and the John Thompson piano books and the supplementary materials had both little stories and pictures, so it was engaging me on several levels, and so I was just reading along and enjoying it. The other thing is being an only child and not having a lot of friends out in the country, books became my best friend, and a trip to the library was something we did every week to reload my book cache.
I remember that was sort of how we built our time. Was, you know, you had access to these, and I understand what you're saying, Teresa. You know, we went and looked it up in the encyclopedia. The encyclopedia sits on a phone now, essentially, or a mobile device. But I want to go back. Corinna made a statement about they'll read the cases. You know, they're interested in the multiple personalities and so on. A couple of years ago, we had Janice Ray's book, Ecology of a Cracker Childhood. There's a big section on that about the pine trees and ecology. Students were not interested in that, but they were highly interested in Janice's life. The breakup with the boyfriend, the father who ran the junkyard who didn't like the boyfriend. And when Janice came to speak to us, that's what they wanted to ask her about. You know, did you ever hear from that boy, that guy that you were dating? And so in a sense, this is that hook that we're talking about. I think the question I have is, we have students who come to us at a university, and we expect that there's a transition that's occurring, right? We've crossed a line. We're not in high school anymore. We're in college. We're here to be instructors at the college level. How do we make the transition, Joe? What is that thing that we've got to do to help make that transition work?
Well, I'd go back to something that Ben said about helping students to identify with what we're dealing with. And I'll give you one example that is not highly emotional, but it hooked somebody, to use your word. I had a student that I was working with when I was a grad teaching assistant as an athlete. Didn't enjoy history at all. We were slugging along trying to get through an understanding of imperialism, and he just wasn't getting it. Well, he was a linebacker. So I finally said to him, I said, well, you know, think about Africa like you would a blitz. Yeah, the Europeans are blitzing. Yeah, and since he was a linebacker, he certainly understood that. And that got him going on the idea of what was happening in Africa under the era of imperialism. It was something he could identify with. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, we've all talked before the roundtable began about how difficult it is sometimes to get our students to read, that they only respond to a grade. And I think the grades are important. I do weekly reading quizzes. That's my hook, you know, my nasty hook. My effort to try and draw them out is I always try to give them a specific example of usually a person that they can identify with. Yeah, and if we can just look at that person for maybe 5 minutes in the class and talk about, well, what must it have been like to be that person? I'm top heavy on social history, so that is natural for me. But I think if we can get our students identifying, just as we do, I think, in literature, if we can get them to identify with one or two of the characters in a book, then, you know, we can engage them. But I think that is our job. And one of the ways that we have to do that is mindfully, with each reading assignment, start with something that will engage them. You know, for me, you know, one example, I'm going to start day after tomorrow teaching world history. My first thing is Columbian Exchange. The first thing that I have them look at is a couple of clips that are available on YouTube that describe, well, what must it have been like for the natives when these people arrived? So rather than start with a lot of cognitive, objective data that indeed I want them to learn, I start with something that engages a little bit of who they are as people. And that is how I do it. Now, again, I think we all have our own way of doing it. But that's one of the ways that I try to get them to then read the heavy lifting that's involved in reading the textbook, which for many of them is heavy lifting. You were talking about, one of you were talking about, you know, putting on a recording and having the kids listen. For a lot of our students, that was what high school history was about.
Yeah,
I know with our Common Reading Initiative, we have broken, thanks to Elaine Bassett, we have broken the reading into segments of about 20, 25 pages per lesson, per week, or per class. So there's an amount of reading and then a question or two that they do on our web text, through our web text. And that, I think, helps because the students, you know, avoid procrastination if they participate in that the right way.
Sure.
So
I don't think there's any doubt. If we walk in and we say, you know, Ben comes into his class and goes, here's the 600-page, you know, book, you know, that right away the sense for a lot of our students is I can't do that. Now, ironically, if you think about the generation we're talking about, some of them got through the Harry Potter series.
Right.
And by the end, Harry's author was writing 1,000-page. I mean, the interesting thing to me is what happened to that group of people, because they were reading collectively probably, you know, 7,000 to 8,000 pages.
Right. But they're still there. They're just a small portion, I think.
Yeah.
It looks so phenomenal when we see Harry Potter, the dynamic, but it's like that's a percentage of this other group
That didn't read Potter.
That didn't read Potter. And I think developmentally, between 19 and 25, they look like adults, they walk like adults, they dress like adults, but mentally, of the mammals, we have the longest developmental period. So to assume that someone at 19 or even 23, I can't make the assumption that the K through 12 was fair for everyone. I can't make, especially now that I've learned that sometimes they're being given books on tape to be listening to in the classroom. I can't make the assumption that they've been trained. Of the students I met with last week, none of them have had any instruction on how to take down a textbook or a chapter. So it's like that parsing it out.
And I think that's why we see a lot of our students, when you give them a chapter and a highlighter, every line gets colored.
Right.
Every line gets colored.
And as an educational psychologist, one of the things is surface study strategies versus long, in-depth study strategies. They don't know it. So I'm not a reading specialist, but I am doing a lot about teaching them with every new assignment. And just, they're rather narcissistic still at this age. It's still about what their identity is. So tying it to their lives. If I hear it once, what has this got to do with
This is the linebacker.
me?
This is the linebacker.
What has this got to do with me? Well, not to put Ghost Map down, but a student said the other day, it's about poo. what has that got to do with me?
See, they missed the message, which was the development of modern medicine.
Right.
Because they just saw it as a story about England's sewers.
Right.
A long time ago.
A long time ago
So-
in another country.
So but you and Elaine, brilliantly, you bring something in. Over and over, they said, tell me how this is supposed to matter to me.
Right.
They're looking for role models.
Sure.
They're looking for people who have survived. One student said, if I knew teachers struggled with reading and had to work hard to read and had to work hard in their lives, if I knew it, then I might be wanting to be like you. So it's like they're not, and narcissism's not a bad thing here. It's just like that terrible two, and then the adolescent. This is late adolescence, and who am I?
Sure.
And how am we're still shaping and molding them by these experiences.
Well, let me ask you. Part of what we're doing is creating some takeaways. So clearly, there's a takeaway about we have to find a way to make it very identifiable. Not in a generic sense. I have a sea of students. I've got to figure out how to connect that in. John, what's another, or maybe a part of this? What works?
Let me play off something that Joe mentioned, and it's the idea of a conversation. When I'm setting up my classroom environment, for that very first time, I've got to have a connection. I as the teacher, and so it all starts from that first day where I'm trying to connect. I take some time and go around the room, and I try to establish a conversation, one-on-one. Yes, there's a large audience, and then I try to bring in the idea that we're all part of a great conversation. The Adler and Hutchins, great books, great conversation kind of thing, and that the people in our music classroom that we are striving to recreate, Mozart, for example, we can stay in the practice room and learn all our scales and get all of our technique and muscle memory down, but that's only a small part of the equation. We have to connect with that person that's gone, and the way that we learn about the context and all the really fun stuff about Mozart is by reading. And
I want to pick up, Joe, you talked about this, or I believe you talked about the connecting point, and I know Corinna talked before we went on camera about, in the current Common Reader, there's this great paragraph. I know one of the things that I like to do is I really like to talk about the best line. Can you find a favorite best line? Can you find a favorite best paragraph? Do you guys use that? Because at an emotional level, that's what I'm trying to do, is connect them to something that just resonates. Read this line. Look at what this means or says. Does it connect with you?
I was curious if we marked the same paragraph.
No, it's when they're hanging from the cliff. It says, there is certainly one way to size up the options, untested versus proven, but that would be the wrong way to look at it. If I assessed things that way, I would never have gotten off the ground to do this climb in the first place. Here's the way I see it. Either I untie the safety line and rappel through the open air down toward the ledge, or I continue to dangle on the safety line with no possibility of relief or rest. It's not a complicated situation. I untie the knot without hesitation.
Yeah, isn't that great? And that ought to be an opening point in a class if you have that kind of paragraph that says, let's talk about why that works for us, why it resonates. Why do those words matter? I talk about, if you want to be an effective reader, eventually you have to have a love affair with words, that words matter. The distinctions between words matter. They're not something we just throw down.
Well, see, that's one of the things that a lot of my students get frustrated with, because, especially if we're looking at something like a poem. We'll take the poem, and what I like to do is, if it's a fairly short poem, I'll actually read it to them out loud. So, because poetry is meant to be heard. And then basically we look through the text, and the question sort of is, what are the most important points here, and what is sometimes I'll just go line by line. What does this line mean? And I'll get one answer from one student, maybe I'll get another answer from another student. I might end up with 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 different answers. But that actually frustrates the students a lot of times, because they'll look at it and they'll say, okay, which one is it? Right. Which one is it? But it's not just one answer most of the time. Most of the time, at least in English, it's multiple answers. It's all of them, and that's part of the beauty of it. That, you know, that there's this sort of a palimpsestic layering of meaning.
We love ambiguity.
We love ambiguity.
Well, and,
yeah.
you know, and yet this generation, second generation of that ill-fated self-esteem movement back in the 70s, second generation we're in, everything's got to have reward, everyone's got to be concrete, and we've been, sadly, in many cases, teaching to the test for 30 years now. So it's like, what's the right answer? And so ambiguity is foreign. They want, especially it's 19 to 25, tell me what it is, tell me what my fate is going to be, where am I going to be? And so, in counseling, in psychology, we have to be comfortable with the unknown.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
We have to sit in the creative silence.
Yeah, Therese.
Well, you know, most of the students who come into orientation have learned using rote memory, and now they've got to take it to a different level. That's why engaged learning and engaged reading is so important, because all of your disciplines are going to be beyond that rote memory. So, you know,
And the thing
Or
that
should be.
the
Or
thing-
should
the-
be,
and the
right.
thing that I talk about with what we read is it's not the answers. We've grown up in a culture that says there have to be answers. The thing I stress so much is the questions are what matter, because the questions don't change over time. What changes over time are the answers, and we know that because periodically we get new answers to the same questions, whether it's medical treatment or whether it's how the body works or how the universe works. The key is, can we ask questions? We've got a couple of minutes. I want to make sure we're creating some takeaways. All right, so let's generate a couple of takeaways. Somebody who's watching this goes, these are great people, but what can I do in my class tomorrow? First takeaway, just give us a takeaway.
Inspiration is real important to me, and I try to engage my students, but the word that comes to my mind is perspiration. And part of it is I let my students know that when I'm reading something difficult, I sometimes have to read it 4 or 5 times before I get it. And so one of the things I try to do with my students, especially the ones that struggle with reading, is have them come to my office during office hours, bring their book with them, and the first thing I say to them is, you know, if you want, because they'll say, how can I pass your quiz? Well, here's how you can pass my reading quiz. Read it once without trying to take notes and without trying to learn it. But just read it once. Don't even try to learn what it is. And the idea is to set up that they get the big concept. Then watch it or read it a second time, take notes, careful notes. Yeah, and as you're going along, as you get to a key term, if you don't get it in the reading, of course this is history specific, go on the internet. I don't shy away from having my students use the internet to help them flesh out parts of the reading, because if they're not getting the big picture, they're not going to understand the nuances that occur in the 6 paragraphs going away from that key term. So I think let them know that we have a hard time learning things and that we have to sometimes read things multiple times.
Okay, all right, big takeaway.
It's sort of like using Cliff's Notes, or what do we call them?
Spark Notes.
Spark Notes, or what, you know, there are online versions, of course. I tell my students that it's okay if they look at that kind of stuff. It's just as long as that's not all they look at.
Right.
You know, if they look at that,
Help is okay.
You know, help is okay.
Right.
Yeah.
John, what about you? What about a takeaway?
Passion. I mean, you have to be passionate about the composers, and then get the students to fall in love with them, and then reading that source material becomes a driving force, because they can see when they go to our student recitals, the performers that do the best job are digging past the notes and trying to put really a deep contextual meaning with what they get.
All right, Therese?
I would say break it into manageable parts and discuss, clarify, but most of all, I think the instructor has to have an interest and has to take the time to try to connect to the students the information.
Okay. Karina, what's the takeaway?
Move away from PowerPoint and lecturing to, create the conversation, and create planning ahead. A lot of perspiration up front. What is this reading about, and how am I going to act it out in the classroom and make it real? When I see it, I can't assume that they're making the connections out there in their dorm room. It's like I want to see them making connections and create a history of connections so that we can keep referring back to them. And I also, this semester, I'm going to take the chapters, and I'm going to, I've read a suggestion, I'm going to mark up how I would note and read it, and make copies of that to show them what my reading looks like. And because that's what they're saying, tell me how you do it. And so instead of underlining, which is a surface strategy, I'm going to show them how I do it. And so that gives them at least a primer for which to make their own strategy.
Okay, and I would add, just as a takeaway for me, I think we have to model what we expect. When I go into class, I want to talk about what I'm reading, and I want to talk about it in a way that's not stilted. You know, this is what I'm reading, and this is why I'm reading it, and I'm interested in that. And or as I often do, wow, you know, you ought to read this book. This is really a good book. So I think we should model
And
that.
what we're reading now that doesn't necessarily have directly to do with what I'm teaching, but boy, this is what made me think
absolutely.
of this.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today in our roundtable discussion of Troy University's Quality Enhancement Plan. Thank all of you all for joining us. We hope you have found some takeaways to work in your classes, and hope that you'll join us in other roundtables in this series.
To learn more about Troy's Quality Enhancement Plan, visit troy.edu. Details on the Quality Enhancement Plan can be found by clicking on Current Students and looking under Student Resources.